Broadcasting from New York City to the world, it's the G-Man Interviews.
Welcome. My special guest for this installment is Matthew Dubas, editor of the nationally distributed publication, the Ukrainian Weekly. The newspaper is also distributed throughout Canada and serves as a major source of news and information for the Ukrainian community in America and abroad. Mr. Dubas has reported on many of the country's political and social conflicts and worked with ambassadors, politicians, policy advisors, activists, and scholars on a range of issues concerning Ukraine. It's a pleasure to welcome you back to the show, Mr. Dubas.
Thank you for having me, Gary.
Over the last few weeks, independent and mainstream news organizations all over the world have reported on the effort to impeach President Donald Trump and your country's involvement. The coverage spans the 24-hour news cycle, and the last thing I want to do is cover what's already been covered. Additionally, the coverage always seems to focus on Trump, the Bidens, Volodymyr Zelensky, and Rudy Giuliani, and few American news organizations have bothered to report on the toll the situation has taken or is taking on the government or good people of Ukraine. That said, I want to go in a totally different direction for this interview. I'd like you to provide a Ukrainian perspective on everything that's transpired from the beginning of the impeachment process up to this point. Would you be comfortable with this format?
Sure.
Great. To start things off, could you explain how you've been impacted by the series of events as a journalist and someone of Ukrainian descent?
Well, I'm not 100% from Ukraine itself. I'm born here in the United States, so I can tell you what I know from people who have come from Ukraine and have told me what their experiences are through this whole impeachment thing. I would say that there's a lot of division even amongst how Ukrainians view this whole impeachment thing. There's people who support, I guess, suspicions and accusations that we have flying around. And then there's the others who support Trump and are willing to let this play out and see it as a ploy by Democrats, really, to upset the 2020 elections. And it's really more reflective of the American perspective to how it is a divisive event that really is transpiring. And the more we're digging in, the more we're finding more dirt. And the implications in Ukraine is, how does this impact relations between U.S. and Ukraine? How does it impact foreign investment in Ukraine and military cooperation as a NATO partner and the United States?
How has the Ukrainian Weekly been impacted in terms of providing balanced coverage and accuracy in its reporting?
Well, oftentimes organizations will come out with statements, like we've had the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America and the Ukrainian Canadian Congress come out in support of Ukrainian American veteran Lieutenant Colonel Vindeman, and I think that they have identified it as a smear against Ukrainians, and this is how it should be viewed. But at the same time, I'm also reading on Facebook that there are other Ukrainians out there who see this as a insubordination on the part of the Ukrainian American and are willing to almost give Trump the benefit of the doubt and say that he's the commander-in-chief, and if you don't like it, that's it's time for you to go. That has been reflective of Trump's administration throughout. Is if you're not really a team player, you're kind of dead weight, and he eventually gets rid of you. We've seen that with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. We've seen that with National Security Advisor John Bolton. We've seen that with others. So it's really a pattern of behavior that substantiates a lot of those claims.
You mentioned that Ukrainian committees and civic organizations have submitted statements to your publication about the series of events. Has there been any response from the Ukrainian military, given the ongoing conflict in the region?
I'm sure on the military front, it's from the Ukrainian perspective, disheartening to see this suspicion or painting of Ukrainians as being some sort of spies for Russia or what have you. There is this legacy of corruption that Ukraine has to shake off, and this also affects the military too. And I think that the military of even 5 years ago is 100% different than Ukraine's military today. And U.S. advisors and U.S. coordinators will agree to that assessment. And it's healing that wound of suspicion and mistrust. And I think that that is something that will take time. And I think that, unfortunately, it leaves the gap there for Putin to manipulate, and through public opinion even, not even based on facts.
Many in and outside the halls of Congress have labeled Lieutenant Colonel Alexander S. Vindman, a Ukrainian, a traitor to his country for testifying against Trump. Have you heard or seen anything to suggest the Ukrainian military supports that assessment?
I don't know what their statements have been regarding that, but the military is the military, and a decorated combat veteran is to be respected, period. And I think this gentleman decided to bring these things up. It was a matter of his concerns. And did he have to go public with it? Perhaps he did, because he wasn't getting any traction with the normal chain of command. And simply being informative is never a crime, I think. Whatever was discussed on this telephone call and the transcripts are incomplete anyway, but we're dealing with hearsay, and I think it lends more clarity to the situation through his testimony rather than remaining silent and allowing the waters to continue to be muddy.
What's been the reaction of the Ukrainian American community you serve?
Well, just like regular Americans, Ukrainian Americans are divided on the subject too, so it's a matter of who do you believe and...
Hold on. Your publication covers the Canadian region as well. So you're saying Ukrainian Americans in Canada share the same view as those in the U.S.?
It's hard to say because politically Canada is run more with the Labour Party, which is very similar to how the United States House of Representatives has a majority with the Democratic Party. But there is this constant ebb and flow between Republicans and Democrats, just like in Canada they have Labour and the Conservatives. Now, as far as how they interpret the impeachment and that whole inquiry, I would say, I would maybe less so divided in Canada than it is here in the United States. I think in the United States it's more interpretation of how things are really unfolding. But as far as identifying this lieutenant colonel as a traitor or as a hero, I would say the majority see him more as a hero than as a traitor.
How are Ukrainian government officials that you're connected to, high and low level, reacting to the intense media coverage and how the country is being portrayed?
What I've experienced and what I've heard from these leaders and government officials is they're happy that Ukraine is in the news. But the reason why Ukraine is in the news is not so good. But, as diplomats, everything is positively spun. At the same time, I can say that certain representatives are looking at it from a wartime perspective where who benefits from what is unfolding and is there any real manipulation from behind the scenes? And that is something that doesn't often get discussed, but, we were talking about it in 2016 and how Russians were interfering in the election and here we are, possible Russian interference in even an impeachment inquiry. The government officials see this as potential threats, look to promote Ukraine more for investment opportunities and stuff like that and cooperation on military and other areas. And it's a real quagmire where we don't know. We're not given all the information, and we're made to make important decisions based on incomplete information. It's not a good situation.
How do your family members feel about the fact that their homeland has been thrust into the global media spotlight like never before and become the subject of scrutiny?
Well, my family members see it as, Ukraine is definitely under the microscope, and in certain respects it's good because it flushes out all the bad blood and the corruption that really is percolating to the surface now, and you see even connections between Dmitry Firtash, who's out in Vienna, who's wanted by the FBI. He also had some sort of connection with the Bidens and stuff like that. So these oligarchs who are still connected to Russia or being manipulated by Russia, that those ties and those connections are being severed. Ukraine is going its own direction. Russia's going its own direction. And it's day to day. I mean, we see how the ceasefire is starting to, I guess, take hold in certain areas, and there's optimism for the future, but at the same time, there's caution. Nobody takes anything for granted, and everybody wants Ukraine to at least have its neighbors and its allies back it, not to have this division like we're seeing, or people trying to foment even bipartisan support for Ukraine from the United States. It's Ukrainians in Ukraine watch this, hoping for the best.
Is there a crucial aspect of this story that you feel is being dismissed or overlooked?
I'll have to think about that one. That's a good one. A lot of it is expected of Ukraine's new president. I think that because he is a political outsider newcomer, his story is kind of similar to Trump's as being political outsiders without the real estate mogul background or anything like that, or celebrity status, but to some extent he was a celebrity. So how these two administrations are governing and how the relationship is hopefully going to flourish. We have less than a year of relationship with the United States, and unfortunately we still don't have a permanent U.S. ambassador in Ukraine. That is something that nobody has really discussed. We have an interim, which was Ambassador William Taylor, and now he's been subpoenaed and testified against Trump in this inquiry. That's an aspect I think that is missing in the dialogue. What the media gets wrong also, not only the Ukraine or any sort of usage of that, there is no article in front of Ukraine. Ukraine is always an independent country. It's not a republic. It's not none of that. The other thing is emphasis. Syllables on Ukraine, right? Everybody calls it Ukraine when it's just Ukraine. The emphasis is on the second vowel sound, not the first. So, especially in radio, I notice it more so that you hear more Ukraine than Ukraine. The second emphasis is correct. Otherwise, I think the coverage has been very good, and unfortunately, Ukraine is in the news for these circumstances.
Do you feel the relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine will deteriorate if Trump is reelected?
No, I don't think so. I think that the U.S. has demonstrated so much support for Ukraine. It's very difficult for that relationship to backslide to the point where Ukraine would slip into Russia's orbit or sphere of influence. Ukraine is really, committed itself to Western integration and stuff like that, and whoever is in charge in the White House, it doesn't really matter. The good news is we always have change, so regardless if Trump gets reelected, something down the road will happen where the relationship will always grow in a different direction, At least I'm hopeful. Maybe wrongfully so, but I'm hopeful.
Always a pleasure having you on, Mr. Dubas. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Barry.
As usual, I thank you for joining me as well, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time, stay cool, stay safe, and stay informed.